There are people who make music, and there are people who make the people who make music. Clive Davis was the second kind. For more than half a century, he sat in a chair that most music fans never think about, the chair behind the chair, the one where a man with a sharp ear and a sharper instinct decides whose voice the whole world is about to hear. And on the night of June 22, 2026, that chair finally went empty. Clive Davis died at his home in New York City. He was 94 years old. His representative said he passed peacefully from an age-related illness, surrounded by his family. Now, if you only know one thing about Clive Davis, it is probably this. He is the man who discovered Whitney Houston, and we are going to get to Whitney, I promise you. Her story and his story are stitched together so tightly that you cannot tell one without the other. But here is what most people never understood about Clive Davis. By the time he ever laid eyes on a young woman singing in a New York nightclub, he had already built one empire, lost it in disgrace, and built a second one from nothing. The Whitney chapter was not the beginning of his story. It was the comeback inside a comeback. So before we talk about the voice he found, let us talk about the man who found her, where he came from, how he rose, how he fell, and how a kid from Brooklyn who lost everything turned himself into the most powerful set of ears in the history of American music. Let me take you back to the beginning. He was born on the 4th of April, 1932 in Brooklyn, New York, Crown Heights. This was the Depression era, and the Davis family did not have much, and what happened next is the kind of thing that shapes a man for the rest of his life. By the time Clive was in his late teens, both of his parents were gone. His mother died, and then not long after, his father. He was essentially an orphan before he was old enough to really begin his adult life. There was no family fortune waiting for him. There was no safety net. There was a smart, driven young man and the clothes on his back, and that was it. And here is the first thing you need to understand about how Clive Davis saw the world. He did not come up through music. He came up through books and discipline and raw academic horsepower. He was sharp enough to earn a scholarship, sharp enough to get himself through New York University, and then sharp enough to go all the way to Harvard Law School, where he graduated in 1956. Think about that for a second. The man who would one day be called the greatest talent spotter in the record business did not start out as a musician, or a songwriter, or a producer. He started out as a lawyer. A very, very good one, and that is the thread that runs through this entire story. Clive Davis always heard music a little differently than the people making it, because he was never only listening as a fan, he was listening as a strategist. In the early 1960s, his legal work brought him into the orbit of Columbia Records, one of the giants of the industry. He came in on the business side, the contracts and the corporate machinery, but he was paying attention. He was watching how the whole thing worked, how a song became a hit, how a hit became a career, how a career became money, and the executives above him began to notice that this young attorney had something rare. He understood the business cold, but he also had taste. He could feel where the culture was going before it got there. By 1967, Clive Davis was running Columbia Records, and then came the moment that changed his life, and honestly, changed the direction of American popular music. That same year, he went to the Monterey Pop Festival in California. Now picture this. Here is a buttoned-up, Harvard-trained record executive, a lawyer by training, walking into the very center of the 1967 counterculture. Flowers in people's hair, a brand new kind of sound coming off that stage. A lot of men in his position would have looked at that crowd and seen chaos. Clive Davis looked at it and saw the future. He saw an enormous wave of young people, and a sound that the old guard of the record industry simply did not understand yet, and he understood that whoever learned to speak that language first was going to own the next 20 years. And one performer that weekend stopped him cold. A young woman with a voice like a thunderstorm, singing with a band called Big Brother and the Holding Company. Her name was Janis Joplin. The raw power of that voice, the emotion just pouring off the stage, Davis knew it in his gut within seconds. This was the real thing. He moved to bring her to Columbia, and just like that, the lawyer became a star maker. That Monterey instinct became the blueprint for everything that followed. Through the late 60s and into the early 70s, Clive Davis turned Columbia Records into an absolute powerhouse, and he did it by trusting that same gut over and over again. He helped bring the band Santana to a mass audience, taking that Latin rock fusion sound and putting it on the radio across America. He was there in the crucial early days for an artist named Bruce Springsteen. He worked with the band Chicago. He brought in Earth, Wind, and Fire. Look at the range of that. Rock, soul, pop, the experimental, the theatrical. Davis was never locked into one lane. He just kept asking one question: is this real and will it last? And if the answer was yes, he found a way to get it onto a record and into America's living rooms. By the early 1970s, Clive Davis was arguably the single most important executive in the entire record business. He had the title, he had the hits, he had the respect of everyone in the room. He had built the empire. And then, in 1973, it all came crashing down. In May of that year, Columbia Records fired him, and it was not quiet. It was not some graceful transition with a nice press release. He was dismissed amid allegations involving the misuse of company money, accusations that company funds had been spent on personal expenses. For a man who stood at the very top of his industry, this was a public humiliation of the highest order. The most powerful man in music shown the door, his name in the newspapers for all the wrong reasons. Now I want to be careful and precise here, because the facts matter, and on this channel we deal in confirmed facts and nothing else. So here is what is actually documented. In the end, the legal matter resolved without the dramatic courtroom outcome those early headlines might have made you expect. Davis pleaded guilty to a single count of failing to pay taxes. He was fined $10,000. The other counts were dropped. That is the confirmed legal record, full stop. But by then, the damage to his reputation had already been done. He had lost the company he built, he had lost his chair, and to a lot of people in the industry, Clive Davis, just past 40 years old, was finished. And this is the part of the story that gets completely lost when people only remember him as the Whitney Houston guy. Because what he did next is the real measure of who this man was. He did not disappear. He did not slink off into early retirement on his savings and his memories. Within about a year of being fired in disgrace, Clive Davis started over completely. In 1974, he founded a brand new record label. He called it Arista, and he set out to prove to an entire industry that the ear, that famous golden ear, had not gone anywhere. The empire was gone, so he would simply build another one. Let me tell you what that actually takes. He was rebuilding his reputation from the lowest place he had ever been. The whole industry had watched him fall. So every signing he made now, every single bet he placed, was being judged against the cloud he was operating under. He did not have the safety of the mighty Columbia name behind him anymore. He had a new company, a fresh start, and his own instincts, and that was all. And those instincts did not fail him. At Arista, Davis went right back to doing what he did better than anyone alive. He found talent, and he turned that talent into hits. He took on a singer named Barry Manilow and helped turn him into one of the defining adult contemporary stars of the entire decade, one song after another, climbing the charts. He worked with Dionne Warwick and helped revive and elevate her career. He signed the Grateful Dead to the label. He brought in Patti Smith, the punk poet out of the New York underground. And I want you to sit with that combination for a moment, because it tells you everything. The smooth pop balladeer and the raw punk icon on the same record label, signed by the same man, because Clive Davis was never chasing a genre. He was chasing greatness wherever it happened to be standing. And as the years went on, that golden ear just kept working. Davis built a reputation, and it was not marketing, it was earned, that he could listen to a demo, a rough, unfinished recording, and hear the finished hit hiding inside of it. He could hear what a song was missing. Move this section. Change that ending. The chorus needs to come sooner. He thought like a producer and a strategist and a fan all at the same time, and almost nobody in the history of this business has ever been able to do all three at once, and he kept expanding. He built up branches of his empire into rhythm and blues, into the sounds that were defining young America. He even built a country music division at Arista that broke major stars out of Nashville. We are talking about a level of reach where no matter what kind of music you turned on in this country, there was a real chance the person behind the curtain was Clive Davis. And he never stopped reinventing himself, right alongside the industry he helped shape. When one chapter closed, he opened the next. Later in his career, after his long and storied run leading Arista, he founded yet another label, this time called J Records, at an age when most executives have long since retired to a quiet house somewhere. And he immediately started finding brand new stars all over again. He simply would not stop. The orphan from Brooklyn who lost his parents, who clawed his way through Harvard Law, who reached the very top, who got knocked clean off that top in disgrace, kept standing back up, decade after decade, hit after hit after hit. By this point in his life, the industry had given him a nickname. They called him the man with the golden ears, and that was not a phrase people threw around lightly. It was a recognition that this one human being had an almost supernatural ability to hear, before anyone else in the world, exactly who was going to matter. Now I want to pause right here, because there is a thread in this story that we have to handle honestly, the same way we handle everything on this channel. When a powerful man dies, and especially a powerful man from the music industry, the internet fills up very, very quickly. With theories, with whispers, with dramatic claims about secret schemes and hidden motives and dark deals, and I want to be straight with you the way I always try to be. We are not doing any of that here, and not because it would not get attention, because it would. We are not doing it because Clive Davis's real documented life is already dramatic enough without anyone inventing a single thing. A man does not need a conspiracy attached to his name when the true story already includes building an empire, losing it in a public scandal, pleading guilty in a courtroom, and then rebuilding from the ashes into something even bigger than before. That is a real arc. That is a real, complicated, flawed, brilliant human being, and that is the story actually worth telling. And it brings us to the relationship that would come to define him more than any other, because for all the artists Clive Davis discovered, for all the careers he launched, for all the empires he built and rebuilt and built again, there is one name that the world will always say in the very same breath as his. In the early 1980s, Clive Davis was told about a young singer performing in New York clubs. He went to see her for himself, and he watched a teenage girl step up to a microphone and sing. Now, he had heard a lot of voices by that point in his life, thousands of them. He had built his entire career on knowing, within a few bars, whether a voice was truly special. And what he heard coming off that small stage stopped him completely. He would later say that she would be for the next generation what Lena Horne had been for hers. He signed her on the spot. Her name was Whitney Houston. And what happened between those two people, the executive with the golden ears and the young woman with perhaps the single greatest voice of her generation, would become one of the most extraordinary, most triumphant, and ultimately one of the most heartbreaking stories in the entire history of American music. Let me set the scene for you, because the details of this story are remarkable. It is 1983. Clive Davis, by now firmly back on top of the industry with Arista Records, hears about a young singer working the New York club circuit. She is only 19 years old. She comes from genuine musical royalty, even if the wider world does not know her name yet. Her mother is the gospel and soul singer Whitney Houston. Her cousin is Dionne Warwick, the very artist Davis had helped revive years earlier. And her godmother, by some accounts, was Aretha Franklin herself. The talent was in the blood, but blood does not guarantee a voice like this. Nothing guarantees a voice like this. Davis went to see her perform, and what he witnessed, he never forgot for the rest of his life. He would describe watching this 19-year-old take a song and find a depth of meaning in it that he had simply never heard before from anyone. He said she was bringing it to a level he did not know existed. He did not hesitate. He did not take meetings about it. He signed her on the spot, and he made a prediction that sounds almost arrogant until you remember it came completely true. He said she would be for the next generation what Lena Horne was for her own. And then Clive Davis did what Clive Davis did better than anyone who has ever lived. He went to work building a legend. He was meticulous about it. The song choices, the image, the pacing of her career. He understood that he was not just launching a singer, he was launching a once-in-a-generation event, and he treated every decision that way. And when Whitney Houston's career took off, it did not just take off. It went somewhere almost no one in the history of recorded music had ever been. Here is the fact that captures it best. Whitney Houston became the only artist ever to score 7 consecutive #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. 7 in a row, every single one going all the way to the top. And to understand how staggering that is, you need to know whose record she broke to do it. The previous mark was 6 in a row, and it was held by the Beatles and by the Bee Gees. Think about that. A young woman from New Jersey, guided by a man once written off as finished by his own industry, surpassed the Beatles. Together, the executive with the golden ears and the voice he discovered did something the most famous band in the world never did. For years, they were unstoppable. The album sold in numbers that are hard to even comprehend now. The voice was everywhere. And the relationship between the two of them, Clive and Whitney, grew into something far deeper than business. He was her mentor. He was, by his own description and hers, like family. He considered her, flatly, one of the 3 greatest singers of all time, and he would name the other 2 as Aretha Franklin and Barbra Streisand. That was the company he placed her in, the very best there had ever been. But this is where the story turns. Because no voice, no matter how perfect, lives in a vacuum. And as the years went on, Whitney Houston began to struggle, privately at first, and then, painfully, in public. The struggles with addiction became part of the story the whole world watched unfold. And it was hard to watch, because everyone could see what was being lost. And here is something I think people genuinely do not know about Clive Davis, and it matters for understanding who he really was. He did not just stand by as a businessman watching his investment falter. He tried to help her as a person. He would later speak about writing her a heartfelt letter, begging her to get help. He spoke about staging an intervention for her at his own home, trying to pull her back from the edge. He admitted with real honesty that in the end he had been powerless against the grip of her addiction, despite everything he tried. That is not the confession of a cold executive. That is a man who loved someone and could not save them and lived with it. Which brings us to February of 2012, and to one of the most surreal and tragic nights the music industry has ever known. It was Grammy weekend in Los Angeles, and for decades, the hottest ticket of that entire weekend was Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy Gala, a legendary party he hosted every year at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, packed with the biggest names in music and film. In the days leading up to it, Davis had actually spent time with Whitney. They had met at his bungalow at that very same hotel. They had listened together to 2 new songs she had just recorded for the film Sparkle, her return to the screen. And by his account, she was hopeful. She told him she was getting in shape. She told him she was swimming an hour or 2 every day. She told him she was committed to getting her high notes back. He remembered her as vital and optimistic and looking forward to the future. And then on the afternoon of February 11, 2012, the day of the gala, Whitney Houston was found unresponsive in a room at the Beverly Hilton, the very same hotel where, just floors away, the ballroom was being prepared for Clive Davis's party that night. She was 48 years old. The official investigation would later determine her death to be an accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. The greatest voice of her generation was gone, and she was gone in the same building where her mentor was about to host the biggest night of his social calendar. And Clive Davis was faced with a decision that people still debate to this day. Her body was still in the building. A police investigation was underway upstairs, and the gala was scheduled to begin within hours downstairs. He chose to go forward with the party. Now, this is a moment where it would be very easy to be cruel or to assign dark motives, and I am not going to do that, because the documented facts give us his actual reasoning, in his own words. At the start of that evening, Clive Davis stood before that stunned room and he spoke about her directly. He said, "By now you have all learned of the unspeakably tragic news of our beloved Whitney's passing." He said he did not have to mask his emotion in front of a room full of so many dear friends. He said he was personally devastated by the loss of someone who had meant so much to him for so many years. And then he explained the decision. He said, simply put, Whitney would have wanted the music to go on, and her family asked that we carry on. The party became, in real time, a tribute to her. The singer Tony Bennett stood up that night and spoke of her before he performed, naming her in the same breath as the other great talents the world had recently lost. He recalled that when he first heard Whitney Houston, he had called Clive Davis and told him, "You finally found the greatest singer I have ever heard in my life." But not everyone agreed with the choice to continue. Some of the artists scheduled to perform that night could not do it and stepped away. Some attendees found the whole thing surreal and somber and strange, a celebration happening in a building that had just become the site of a tragedy. The decision drew real criticism, and that criticism is part of the honest record too. There is no clean, simple version of that night. There is only a grieving man making an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and a world left to argue about it ever since. And the heartbreak, unbelievably, was not finished. Because 3 years later, in 2015, tragedy struck that family again, in a way so eerily similar it is almost difficult to speak about. Whitney's only child, her daughter Bobby Christina Brown, who was Clive Davis's goddaughter, was found unconscious. She passed away at just 22 years old, a daughter lost in a way that echoed her mother. For Clive Davis, it was another devastating loss in a story that had already given him more than enough of them. And through all of it, Davis never let go of his belief in what Whitney Houston was. He went on to help produce a documentary and a biopic about her life, because he wanted, in his words, to address the questions about her and to celebrate her musical genius. He did not want her remembered as a cautionary tale. He wanted her remembered as the artist. He said that if anyone ever needed to understand the sheer power of her voice, they should just go watch her live performances. He said you rediscover that she was not only good, she was truly, undeniably great, and he said plainly that he would miss her forever. So when we talk about Clive Davis, the man with the golden ears, the executive who discovered more stars than almost anyone in history, we have to hold the whole picture at once, because his greatest triumph and his deepest heartbreak were the very same person. He heard a teenage girl in a nightclub and knew instantly that the world was about to change. He guided her past the Beatles and into history, and then he had to stand in a hotel with her body floors above him and find the words to say goodbye. He lived another 14 years after that night. He kept working. He kept listening for the next great voice, right to the end. And on June 22, 2026, at the age of 94, Clive Davis finally set down those golden ears for the last time. He was the man who heard greatness coming before the rest of us ever knew to listen. He found a voice that defined a generation. He helped lift her to heights no one had ever reached, and he carried the loss of her for the rest of his life. That was Clive Davis, born in Brooklyn, 1932, gone in 2026, the man who made Whitney. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, take a moment to remember them both, not for how it ended, but for the music they gave us that will outlast every one of us, and we will see you in the next one.